Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday to you and your loved ones. Good to see you guys again. And as we said last week, if you tuned into our how to build a star rating component, link in the description, then you'll know that Riot Gear 66 had requested that we cover state management. And just a little warning, opinion ahead. Jump right in here. You can see I've got the project open that we worked on in the last video, so the engine components here. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow through the documentation on Stencil's website for setting up a state tunnel, and then we're going to kind of implement that into this, and then I'm going to put this up on a branch. Again, links description. I'm going to put this in a branch so that you guys can pull this down and check it out for yourselves. And that being said, let's just jump right to it. So on the documentation here, you can see on the right, it's basically just a way of this state management, the state tunnel is just a way of passing down information and methods and stuff like that down into deeply nested components. So maybe instead of passing all of your props down 3-4 levels of components, instead what we can do is set up one of these tunnels, and then we basically pipe the data from the very top to wherever we want inside of our component structure. So the first thing we're going to do here, as you can see from the documentation, what we're going to do is create the tunnel. And to do that, we just need to create a new file here. So I'm going to go ahead and follow along with the documentation. We're going to right click on source. We're going to do new folder. We're going to call it data. And then in here, we're going to create a new file called message.tsx. And in message.tsx, we want to use this stuff right here. And in this code, we'll actually pull this apart a little bit more in the very near future. But what you're probably going to see, you don't see this on mine, but you're probably going to see this on yours, that this is red squiggly underlined. And that's because we need to actually install the state tunnel library or package that they're using here. So we just do an npm install --save at stencil/state tunnel. And that's going to download and install the state tunnel dependency. You can see there it's added to my dependencies. So now that red squiggly should go away. It might not in VS Code. Every now and then stuff gets stuck, but it's there, it's installed, it's ready to go. So that's step one. So now we've defined the structure of the data that will be passed through. So again, this kind of we'll get into this a little bit later, but this kind of sets the data structure that that our state is kind of supposed to look like. So when we initialize it, we need to pass in these different things. That's what we've defined in this interface. So cool. So now we've created the tunnel. Now we need to pass the state's tunnel to a tunnel provider component. And what that means is we just need to go wherever our app like initializes. We need to basically set up the state tunnel provider. And that just is a fancy way for like, we need to wrap this around the components that are going to be using the state. So in this case, up here at the top of our gallery, since our gallery is the place where all of our components are kind of loading up, this would be a good place to wrap all of our components. And so what we're going to do is we're going to import the tunnel. So import tunnel from /data/messages or message. And so now you can see we've got the green underline, which means it's declared, but it's never read. So let's read this sucker. So go down here a little bit, and what we're going to do is let's set up pretty much the exact demo that they have. We're going to copy the props and the method and everything. And let's just go ahead and pop that guy right here. And we're going to need prop as well as state. Okay, so basically what we've done was we've just set up some default stuff here. So we've set up an intro prop as well as a message string on the state, and then we've got this little count, and then we have an increment function that we basically create this increment method, and then we're going to take all of that, and as you can see here in this next step, we're going to render that stuff and pass it into this tunnel provider down here. So that's what we're going to do right now. Let's go ahead and copy this guy and let's paste that. And instead of us returning a array, in this case, we can take off all of these commas because we're not going to be sending through an array of elements now. Now we just need one tunnel provider where we wrap everything. So now we get this tunnel provider, and we're going to wrap it around all of our organisms. Okay, so now we've got our tunnel provider set up. So you can see here we create a variable, a constant called tunnel state, and then we pass in this dot message and this dot increment. So this dot increment is the actual increment function here, and then this dot message is the message, the state item that we've set up, the string. So cool. So now we've got a tunnel created. We've now got that tunnel wrapped around our components. Now we can go into the state consumption point, as they say down here. And this is just basically the component downstream that we're going to feed the data to. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this test component here. And you can see this component is just a bunch of paragraph tags. We're going to take those out. And then we're going to wrap this in this tunnel consumer, but we need to import our tunnel again. So import tunnel from /data/message. And then now what we can do is we can wrap this in the tunnel consumer as well as this crazy looking tag right here. So there's our tunnel consumer. And let's go one step up. Let's wrap it around the whole component. And you might notice that this has a message and an increment. And that is because if you remember from our two, hold on, typing, thinking, too many things happening once. Okay, so now you can see we've got, okay, so you can see we've got message, consumer, yeah, okay. So now we've got these guys piped in here. Now we should be able to put message and our increment, let's just do onClick equals increment. So now we've wired up our tunnel to this specific component. So just to run through it one more time, you can see message, increment. So message is going to be the text inside of here. Increment is going to be the function that gets executed whenever we click on the paragraph tag. And then that will pipe up, you can see that will pipe up here to the gallery, where this is where we define the increment method, and then this is also where we create the message in the state. And so this is where all the magic is going to happen. And then that, because of the state, because that's going to update the state here, that's going to feed into the tunnel provider, and then that's going to then feed into our test component. And note, we didn't have to create any props on this test component, and we didn't have to pass anything down. It's just kind of like as soon as we implement the tunnel and the tunnel consumer, we can access anything from the tunnel provider. So that's the general gist of how this is set up. So let's go ahead and run npm start here, and we can see it in action. So what you might notice, is we define in here the state with a message of hello, but in our gallery, when we start this state tunnel, we set this message as this dot message. And you can see we increment on the component once it's loaded, we increment automatically. So that's going to set the count to 1, and then it's going to set the message to intro and the count. So if we go into one of our test components here, you can see hello 1. And this intro is hello. So hello 1. So it is working. We have now this thing working, and we should, yep, every time we click now you can see it increments and it passes down the data into that state. So there's the demo, right? There's the working demonstration of state management with the tunnel. And just to run through it one more time, so you can see we define in the tunnel when we make this state, basically we define what it expects. So you can see here it expects a message parameter to be a string. It expects an increment method that's going to be void. And then we create the actual provider consumer. And this is where we implement that state. And you can see we set this default message. We never see this because it's required that we pass our message through. And so like for instance in here, if we were to not pass message through, it would give us an error like you see here. So it has to be defined. But in this case, on our message, you can see that we could make this optional. And if we were to not pass this message through here, now you can see we don't get the text like we should because we're not passing that message through. I thought we would get hello, but I think what's happening here is because message doesn't exist. Yeah, so it's not even getting this hello. So like that, I don't really understand why this lump is even really in their example. It does nothing. But you can see here, this is how we basically create the tunnel, and then we then pass the state to it that we want it to use. And then at any point in time, we can then call this tunnel consumer. And if we call the methods and the things that we pass in, or if we manipulate the data, that will propagate up and then propagate back down. And it's all hooked up without using props. Now, this is where I have to get into my opinion alert. Opinion alert! Okay, so my honest opinion on this is that I don't like it. And here's why. The reason why I don't like this structure, as well as Redux, is because of this right here. So one of the things that I really like about Stencil, and I really like about writing vanilla JavaScript, is that there is no magic that's happening behind the scenes. There's no magical wiring. There's no things that are happening that are beyond developer comprehension. So I feel like this is one of those conventions that will ultimately lead to confusion for other developers that work on this project. So I think it's really intuitive that like when you're working on a component, components have props and components have things that you pass into them, and then they have events that they then emit in order for things upstream to be able to interact and to do things. And so for me, I think that circle of emitting an event and then passing, like updating a state somewhere upstream, and then those then propagating down via the props, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like it's the way JavaScript is meant to work. However, when you put these systems like this in, now you've got this random file that has to be updated now. So like this has to be kept up to date as you change your state and as things change there, which is arguably a good thing, right? But you can do the same thing by defining your state up here in the gallery. So I could define my state prop the exact same way and pass that in. And just as an example of this, I'm going to go ahead and open up another project here. So here you can see we've got a very similar setup. So we've got a very similar setup here, except what we're doing is instead of creating these tunnels and doing all this crazy convoluted stuff, we've got a list of default props here. And these have all of our services, all the things that we use that we need to be updated throughout the application. We create these default props in state. And then via our router here, we then pass those on our ion route. And if you're not using the ionic router, you could use anything. Like these are just props, right? So I'm going to pass those default props in to my routes. And then under each one of my pages, so for instance, here's a page here, I can then import these services, but I'm just importing those for their typings. So I'm not actually importing them here. They're not actually getting imported. They're getting passed in via the props. And then I can just define my props, use the typings that I get from my imported services. And then as you start passing data into components underneath of pages, you start limiting down the data. Like one thing that I see a lot of people do is like for instance, I've implemented all these services and I've taken all this functionality that we need. I've passed it down to the pages, And what I see a lot of people try to do is like they take these services and they pipe those directly into the components that are sitting on the page, which I think is kind of, it's kind of like against the paradigm. Like what you should be doing is creating small components that just accept the data that they need in as simple as a form as you can possibly get it. And then that renders and that makes it agnostic. And that kind of brings me back to why I really don't like this solution, is because now you've eliminated your ability to use these components outside of a project that uses these tunnels. So now not only do I have to like get your component and wire it to my project, I now have to create this magic file that defines the state. I then also have to wire that up inside of whatever page that I have this component on. And so I lose the portability now of this component. Whereas if I was just using props and the event emitters, then I would be able to use these things anywhere. And so that's my take on it. I think there's another good approach at doing state management, and that is Redux. I think they have a StencilJS Redux. They have a repo on this guy, and I probably am going to make an entire video about Stencil Redux, because this is another popular way to handle state management. I didn't want to cover it in this one just because I need to do a little bit more of a deep dive. It's been a while since I've messed with Redux. I used to build some React apps with one of the companies that I worked for, and so I became very familiar with Redux. I liked it. However, again, I feel like you're doing that same kind of thing where you're setting up this stuff to wire to Redux and wire to all these extra dependencies, which kind of, to me, makes it more difficult for all the developers that you work with. Because now, not only do you have to teach them how to use Stencil, now you have to teach them the paradigm of how you update the state and how to use this in other applications and how to pull this in and get all this stuff set up. And all of that is going to create extra confusion and extra things that you have to train for on your team. So that's my opinion on state management. Again, all this code, link in the description for the codepen. But there you have it. Trying to keep this short, sweet, one cut this week. But there you go, Ride Gear. Hopefully that was helpful to you. And again, it's a great solution, and it definitely works. And if that's going to be a good solution for any of you guys, if that's what you're looking for, great, implement that. It works well enough. However, in my opinion, again, just the native way that JavaScript handles things as far as events propagating up and then props propagating back down, I think there's something really intuitive about that, and it's something that you can easily wrap your head around. There's no magic pipe that's piping your data from here to there that you've got to set up some kind of wizardry for, which ultimately, again, I think is just going to create confusion in your development team. And honestly, if you're piping data from up here to a component that's 18 levels down, I would start to argue, like, is my structure of my application too complicated? Is there something that I can simplify here? Or is there a better way that I can do this? But again, neither here nor there, right? So there you go. There you have it. Hopefully this was helpful to you. We've got a lot of stuff going on here recently. That's why these videos have been so last minute. I've just got a lot of stuff cooking here at the labs. So if you want to stay tuned to that, subscribe to us, like, share the video, and also we have some goodies coming up this week, and we want your guys' feedback. Am I wrong about state management, about how this stuff works? Is there something that I'm missing? I'd love to hear you guys' opinion, and we'll even credit you guys in future videos for giving feedback and helping us grow here. So thanks again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys, and we will see you next Saturday with something you guys asked for.